So the Dutch famously have quite an affinity for the colour orange, and this comes from their royal house, the House of Orange-Nassau, which ruled the Netherlands back in the 16th and 17th century and since the Napoleonic Wars. Now, because of this connection, the colour orange has some quite strange political meanings. For instance, William of Orange became William III of England and essentially invaded. And this is why Protestants in Northern Ireland still wear the colour orange. And in South Africa, the Boers, who are descendants of the Dutch essentially, created the Orange Free State, and the old South African flag had the colour orange in, etc, etc, etc. But first, a little etymology. Now, the word orange was first used to describe the fruit in the 14th century in Old French, not the colour. And they probably got the word from Arabic, where they call the fruit a naranj. However, to digress a little bit, this may be a case of rebracketing. Now, rebracketing is easier to explain if I just give you some examples. So, the animal, the newt, used to be called an ute. That was a ute, the animal. And over time, it just became a newt. Understand? The same thing happened with nickname. It used to be an name, and then over time it became a nickname. And the same thing might have happened with orange, going from a naranj to an orange. Now, it took over 200 years for the fruit to give the colour its name. But what's interesting here is in Old English, they probably didn't have a word for orange. Instead, they would use something like gelderred, or in other words, orange red. But this has nothing to do with the Dutch, so I'll get to my point. Now, if you take the House of Orange-Nassau, only Nassau is a region in the Low Countries. Orange, in fact, is in southern France. Up until the 16th century, it was ruled by the House of Chalon. However, in 1530, Philibert, the ruler, died without any children, so the principality went to his sister's son, René, who was a stadtholder in the Netherlands. But he too died without any heir, and it went to his cousin, William the Silent, the leader of the Dutch revolt. So the Orange Principality had very little to do with the Dutch or its rulers, and it was later annexed by the French in 1673. Plus, the name of the region has nothing to do with the colour or the fruit, and it goes right the way back to ancient times. In Roman times, it was called Arausio and was the site of a major battle in 105 BC. Now, Arausio, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, is the name of a Celtic water god, but over time it just seems to have changed into orange. So the Dutch wear orange because a town in southern France, thousands of years ago, was named after a Celtic water goddess. However, over time, the inhabitants changed the name until it became orange. Meanwhile, while all this was going on, the Arabs had a word for a fruit called a naranj, but in Europe it became an orange, and this lent its name to a colour, and it just so happens to be exactly the same name as the town in France. And this town in France was gifted, albeit temporarily, to the leader of the Dutch revolt, and that became the title of the Dutch monarchs, and that's why they wear orange. Very little to do with the Netherlands.